There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture.
We have breaking news in one of the world's most infamous missing persons mysteries.
A German prisoner has been identified as a new suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann from a holiday resort in Portugal 13 years ago.
Do not attempt to adjust the picture. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. Wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. Do not attempt to adjust. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. Do not attempt to adjust. Do not attempt to adjust. Do not attempt to adjust the.
What if there is something wrong with our set? What if there is something wrong with this picture? What if we did? What if we do attempt to adjust the picture? What if we do attempt to think about this in a different way?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is part 2 on Mr. Amaral's commentary on this so-called new search. And if you're thinking there's going to be some critical thinking here, we're going to add to the narrative that is missing from all the media coverage. There hasn't been, I think, one single reference to a critical aspect. Anyone know what that is? Well, we're going to bring that in. We're going to bring the most relevant aspect that has been missing from the media narrative to this present analysis. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button. You can also subscribe, like, share, and let's get started. So in our initial analysis, we asked the question, what critical factual information are the German police working from? Or whatever it is, it appears to be severely flawed. I think another question to ask is, what critical factual information aren't the German police working from? How do they need to adjust their set? And I mentioned the Telegraph as providing some of the better reporting on this case. And let's go back to that article where at the back end of the article that I referenced earlier, having landed their slings and arrows earlier against the former detective, that's Gonzalo Amaral, the Telegraph boomeranged back to provide a little bit of additional context, writing, Mr. Amaral, who won a lengthy legal battle with the McCanns over his book, The Truth of the Lie, repeated earlier claims that the convicted paedophile Bruckner was a scapegoat. Now, what is a scapegoat?
Scapegoat.
We are controlled. Do not attempt to adjust the picture.
But that is exactly what we are attempting to do, to adjust the picture, to change our set. And so Amaral said that there's nothing on him, that's Bruckner. He says, I'm not trying to defend him. He's not a flower you'd want to smell. Quite a nice, picturesque sort of figure of speech there. But he says, I've never seen such shoddy work as the German police is. And I have to agree with the detective, essentially saying,
That's the best you can do!
And yes, we do have to ask that question, because I think there's a lot of room for improvement from this German investigation, also from this whole line of inquiry. Now, going back to that article from the Telegraph, which came about in the middle of this search, they write, in September 2022, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of Portugal's Supreme Court, which in 2017, right, 8 years ago, cleared Mr. Amaral of having libeled the McCanns. The Portuguese court decided that freedom of expression should prevail over the British couple's claims of libel. Well,
What more than that?
and the Telegraph doesn't really say. They just say that Mr. Amaral didn't libel the McCanns, but they don't really say why. And they don't really talk about that case in any detail, because there's another way of looking at the ECHR ruling in his favor, in the detective's favor. It's that the ruling decided that what the lead detective said in the Madeleine McCann case wasn't just about freedom of speech, nor was it malicious. and the European Court reiterated certain evidentiary aspects, basically doing what the Cairns order did in the Ramsey case, except that the Cairns order misunderstood the Ramsey case because it accepted one detective's skewed view of the case and used his reputation to overrule kind of common sense when arguably it shouldn't have, whereas the ECHR accepted one detective's expertise despite, in a sense, his ruined reputation because they looked at his observations and agreed with him. Have any of you seen this report, this press release from the European Court of Human Rights dealing with a final sort of nail in the coffin in terms of the McCann case? McCann and Heedy versus Portugal. This was a case they lost. If you go to principal facts, the applicants Gerald McCann and Kate McCann are British nationals. In May 2007, and they go through the details of the case, look at the first paragraph on the second page. The investigation was entrusted to Inspector Gonzalo Amaral from the Criminal Investigation Department. Here it is. Biological and blood samples were subsequently detected by British sniffer dogs inside the holiday apartment and in the trunk of a vehicle that the applicants had rented a few days after their daughter's disappearance. As a result, the parents were placed under investigation in September 2007. They were suspected of having hidden their daughter's body following her death, possibly as a result of an accident inside the apartment, and of having staged an abduction. Now, what do you think having staged an abduction suggests? It means someone carried her out of the apartment somewhere, right? And that is why one refers to the abductor's route. Not that there was some other abductor, but that there was a staged abduction. Some people still don't seem to understand that. And this is in the legal documentation from the European Court of Human Rights. They're basically saying this was a possibility intuited by the detective, right? And then he says those proceedings were discontinued in July 2008. Incidentally, that same court highlighted the dog evidence as evidence within 2 or 3 paragraphs of the first page dealing with the principal facts. That's something the British media have been loath to do. And I challenge you to find a single outlet reporting on those alerts this week. Any information to do with dogs that were repeated in any detail this week. If you do find one, let me know and I'll be sure to give you a noddy badge. The ex-police officer's claims, this is back to the Telegraph, about the McCanns were dismissed years ago by Portuguese police and Scotland Yard detectives. Now, that is also part of the media narrative. So this is what the Telegraph are sort of coming back to, where they're basically saying Amaral's claims were laughed at, dismissed, regarded as not credible. Strange, because the ECHR didn't dismiss the claims. They simply said there was some possibility, I guess, inherent in them. And the Telegraph itself reported on a Portuguese court saying the following as recently as 2017. But it seems the Telegraph can't even remember its own reporting. Mr. Amaral previously described the last German police searches in Portugal 2 years ago as another attempt to frame Bruckner. He told Portuguese media outlet Sabado at the time, "In a simple analysis, I see there's no new investigation, and what is occurring is more a case of constructing a profile and a scapegoat."
Scapegoat.
What is a scapegoat? It's a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others, especially for reasons of expediency. A scapegoat is a whipping boy, a victim, a fall guy, a patsy. And so the question is Bruckner a fall guy? Is he being blamed for the wrongdoings of others? Well, who are these others? And is it for reasons of expediency? Well, as long as the finger is being pointed at someone, it's not being pointed at someone else. That's expedient. In the Bible, a goat is sent into the wilderness after the Jewish priest had symbolically laid the sins of the people on it. Which people? Which sins? And so I do think when you're dealing with a case that's unsolved 18 years later, you've kind of got to ask the question, maybe we do need to adjust our set. Maybe we are going down a dead end. Maybe someone is being made a scapegoat. Maybe we need to look somewhere else. Maybe we need to start at the beginning at apartment 5A and not sort of somewhere in the middle and scratch around in the dirt without really taking it in a meticulous step-by-step, systematic, chronological, systematic process. In a more general sense, you can tell the Telegraph, along with pretty much all British media, frame their own coverage of Amaral as overtly sympathetic to the British nationals at the centre of the case, while being not so covertly undermining of the lead detective. And you can imagine how a lot of British people simply like that. We like defending our own people, our own tribe, and we like criticizing someone who isn't like us, speaks a different language, is from someone else, and someone who's not being very nice to some of our countrymen. It's putting us in a bad light. That's something that you can imagine is popular and feels good, but is that the truth? So you see, it's not just the German police going over old evidence. The British media are experts at recycling the same old dog-eared narrative themselves. And again, if you carry on doing that, how do you expect to solve a case? If you don't do anything new or different, how do you expect to solve a case? And that's why it's more than a little rich seeing Sky News interview a Brit living in the area who says it's nothing new and they'll be surprised if anything comes of it. Well, it's just the same with the reporting on this case. The Jay Slater case was actually a recent example, one I followed in real time from beginning to end. Basically happened almost a year ago. In about a week's time, it'll be a year ago now that happened in Tenerife. And I must say, at the time I was surprised. I saw a lot of the same arrogance, not only on the ground, but especially in the media. This time the Spanish were accused of being inept, but don't worry, we'll get far better resources from Britain to come and search the terrain that they've never seen before, and we're going to produce a breakthrough. And so British experts promised to come in and solve the case in 3 days. In the end, it was Spanish experts who found the teenager from Lancashire, and even after they did, the British still knew better. Their boy had to have been murdered. He couldn't possibly have been responsible for his own demise, just as in Madeleine's case. But the British people in the story couldn't possibly have done anything wrong. It had to be some sleazy local. And so you have this whole thing emerging in the Jay Slater case that it's also some kind of conspiracy. There's some kind of unsolved aspect to it. Well, it is if you don't think in a logical, sensible way. Overall, what we are seeing on a massive scale is a widespread failure to think critically. And guess what? The media luxuriate in our ignorance. The media play us for fools. And for as long as we do that, we are fated to move around in circles, going nowhere. The search for truth starts not by believing you know better than someone else, but by acknowledging what you don't know. And sometimes the truth is an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the truth is an inconvenient truth. Isn't that why it's so hard to see the truth of this case? What's also very ironic is that the sniffer dogs that I think made a breakthrough in this case were actually brought in by British people, British investigators, British experts, and yet it's nevertheless ignored and derided and dismissed by the British, and it appears the Germans. I'm not going to take it further than that, but I will be following this up with my advice on where to do a targeted search for Madeleine in the next episodes. So look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.